When People magazine put her picture on the cover, there was a national outpouring from survivors who turned to her for help and support. Marilyn has personally answered over 8,000 letters, has spoken in 225 cities. Survivors line up for 2 or 3 hours just to tell her their stories. Using her experiences as the scaffolding and cutting-edge research as the foundation, she shares knowledge and insights through stories that are riveting and instructive in her new book, Miss America by Day, Lessons Learned from Ultimate Betrayals and Unconditional Love, which was on Colorado's best bookseller for 13 weeks, and I'm sure that somewhere back here there are books, and I encourage you to stop and buy one. Marilyn recently learned that her book won first place in the Writer's Digest National Competition. Miss America by Day won first place in the most inspirational book category. We are so pleased to have Marilyn with us today. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction, Joyce. Everyone is younger than I am. I checked into a hotel about a year ago, and I was waiting in line to check in, and I noticed a mother talking to her little boy, and they were staring at me. And then it was my turn to check in, so I checked in and went to the elevator, and I was waiting for the elevator to open the door when the little boy came over to me, and he said, this is an absolutely true story. He said, "Are you really the oldest living Miss America?" So I've heard it before. Angela, where are you? Angela Nelson is just the best special events person ever. She arranged everything for Milwaukee, and I know she was instrumental. There she is in the back of the room, along with Denise. Thank you so much, Denise, for having everything. They don't get it sort of right. It is perfect. Thank you for inviting me to share in the joy of opening your advocacy center. Supporting this center is the most important thing you can do for children in your community. I know that you have been devastated by the recent arrest of the police school liaison officer charged with sexually molesting teenage boys at East High School. 1 in 10 of our children will be sexually molested at school by a teacher, a coach, a liaison officer, 1 in 10 before he or she graduates from high school. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually violated before the age of 18. But we can change that. I would like to start by sharing a little bit of my story so you can understand why prevention and intervention is so critically important and what happens to a life when there is no prevention or intervention. And then I would like to touch on ways that you can specifically help to keep your children and your grandchildren safe. I was 53 years old before I was able to say the ugliest 6-letter word in the English language. The word is incest. I was an incest victim from age 5 to age 18. I stand before you today, a 67-year-old incest survivor. Every day and every night of my life have been dramatically impacted by incest. It would not be possible to know or understand me unless you knew about the unending sexual violations I endured as a child and as a teenager. The trauma was so severe, I did what many children do in order to survive. I split, or to use the psychiatric word, I dissociated. I split into what I call a day child and a night child. As difficult as this is for most people to believe or understand, until I was 24, I, the day child, had no conscious knowledge of the night child. During the days, no embarrassing or angry glances ever passed between my father and me because I had no conscious knowledge of the traumas and the terrors of the night child. But the more degraded the night child became, the more the day child needed to excel. From breaking and training wild horses to skiing on the University of Colorado ski team to graduating with Phi Beta Kappa honors, I believed I was the happiest child who ever lived. I truly believed that. Only one person began sensing something was wrong. Dee Dee Harvey was the youth minister at our church. I met him when I was 15. For 9 years, this brilliant and talented man gently poked and prodded, trying to find the source of the pain that he, and only he, sensed behind my ever-present smile. Finally, at age 24, while we were having lunch together at the Beverly Hills Hotel in Los Angeles, with words I do not remember, "Father, bedroom, nighttime," he broke through the concrete wall I had built around my secret, and sobs began erupting from the deepest part of my soul, sobs that for decades I couldn't stop. I sobbed to exhaustion, and then I looked up and I said, "Don't tell anyone." His brilliant response was, "Who don't you want me to tell?" And I answered with one word, "Larry." He said, "Then Larry is the only one we have to tell." I had loved Larry from the first time I met him at age 15, but I kept running from him, even to the point of marrying someone else, not understanding that the more perfect he found me to be, the more I needed to run, for fear he would find out who I really was. Larry flew to California the next morning. He came reluctantly. After 9 years of my love, always interspersed with total and complete rejections, he had finally gotten me out of his life. What could I possibly have to tell him that would make any difference? There is no way to describe the deep shame and guilt I felt. When Larry walked into Dee Dee's office, I lowered my head, the sobbing began, and I waited for Dee Dee to tell him. Instead, Dee Dee said, "Marilyn has something to tell you." I sobbed, "I can't. I just can't." Dee Dee said, "We will wait until you can." I sobbed uncontrollably, as I would hundreds of times in the years to come. I was crying too hard to speak in sentences. I searched for words. It was agonizing. When Larry finally understood, he enfolded me in his arms and held me for a very long time. And then he said, as if to himself, "I understand everything now." Although Dee Dee wanted to marry us that very day, it would be 2 long years before I would be strong enough. I have known about my secret, hidden self only 24 hours longer than Larry. And ever since that life-changing day decades ago, we have walked every step of this agonizing journey together. 2 men saved my life. But like red dye poured into a can of white paint, incest has colored every aspect of my life. One of our first challenges, I had spent 13 years from age 5 to age 18 trying to not feel anything Just lock up your body as tight as you can and try not to feel. The most degrading moment of my life came in my late 40s, when the memories came up that sometimes I had not been able to shut my body down. My body had responded. There are no words to describe the degradation and humiliation I felt when those memories came up. Now at age 24, I was going to marry the man of my life, and I was supposed to respond spontaneously. I had to learn how to give and accept sexual love. I remember the first time we were intimate. We were laughing and giggling and nuzzling and snuggling, and all of a sudden I knew where this was going, and I could just feel my body beginning to shut down. And Larry knew it as well, and he said softly, "It's okay to have fun." And I thought, fun? It was a completely foreign concept to me. And so we began developing our sexual relationship around fun. From age 24 to age 39, I worked at a frenetic pace, which I had always done. This allowed no time or energy for subconscious memories or feelings to rise, although during those years, things would happen that I wouldn't understand for such a long time. For example, after 8 years of marriage and being told we would never be able to have children, Larry and I were blessed with our miracle baby. I was 34 at the time. I was prepared for natural childbirth, but at the time of the delivery, the baby was in a very difficult breech position. I would allow no anesthesia. As I was being taken into the delivery room on a gurney, I heard a man say above my head, "I am your anesthetist in case we need to do a C-section." And I said, "There will be no anesthesia. We will not be needing you." And I locked my eyes into Larry's eyes, and I began a perfect, natural delivery. And then I got up off of the table, and I walked back to my room. The hospital staff buzzed with my heroic feat. What no one, including me, realized was that what I did wasn't brave at all. Brave would have been to allow a man to put any part of my body to sleep. Because sleep is when a man can do anything he wants with you, and you have no power, and there is no one to hear you or help you, and there is no hope of it ending, ever. When our daughter Jennifer was about 11, she fell asleep on our bed one night, and Larry leaned over to pick her up to take her back to her own bedroom. She was growing fast, and her arms were all long and dangly, and he was sort of wrestling with her to get her up. And I realized Jennifer had fallen into such a deep sleep, she didn't even know someone was touching her. My insides were just screaming out, "Jennifer, never fall into such a deep sleep that you don't know someone is touching you." But another part of me was in awe of her trust. She could allow her dad to pick her up and keep her safe always. It would take me hours to unwind from such intense, conflicting feelings. I can never remember falling asleep naturally. I'm sure as a very young child I fell asleep, but my father awakened me by touching me over 600 times. And by the time I was 10, 11, 12, and my room was above the garage door, he would not come home usually until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and so I would lie in bed and just think, is it tonight? Is it tonight that I'm going to hear the scuff, scuff, scuff of his slippers until finally I literally lost my ability to fall asleep. I've had a very hectic travel schedule the last 2 days. I can't fall asleep on a plane. I see so many people drift off. That is not available to me. My father took away my ability to fall asleep. Tonight, I either take a sleeping medication, which fortunately at age 50 stopped the night terrors, or I lie awake in a deep rest, waiting until morning. My subconscious asserted itself in other ways. Shortly before my 40th birthday, I came home from a successful speaking tour and felt a strange, compelling urge to lie down, as if a huge magnet were drawing me down. I lay in bed, not in my usual tight fetal position, but in the position of a dead person in a casket. I had been stricken with a physical paralysis that would continue sporadically for 12 years, from age 39 to age 51. I couldn't move my arms or my legs. My mind seemed to have no connection to my body. I was hospitalized for the better part of 3 months. Larry never left my side. It was years later that I put the puzzle together as to why my body had gone into physical paralysis at age 39. It may have been sparked by something one of my doctors said. When they couldn't find anything physically wrong, 4 doctors walked in lockstep to say, we can find nothing wrong with you. We're going to release you from the hospital. And the last man to walk out was my uncle by marriage. And he came back in and he said, you know, my darling, I wonder if this has anything to do with your turning 40. Perhaps Miss America could not age gracefully. His question was brilliant. My physical paralysis had everything to do with age, but not my age. Our daughter Jennifer was turning 5, the age I was when the violations began. Her age began triggering the memories and the feelings as another part of me used every ounce of energy to repress these totally unacceptable memories and feelings, and the result was physical paralysis, but it would be years before I would make that connection. During the hospitalization, I kept having a daydream. I saw my father lying in a casket, and I was standing over him saying, too late, you died, and we never spoke of it. Because my doctors could find nothing physically wrong, they urged me to see a psychiatrist. It was agonizing to tell the psychiatrist about my father. I felt as if I were betraying him. But after 3 sessions, I said to my psychiatrist, I have to talk to my father. I'm 40 years old. We've never talked about it. I always pretended that I was asleep. These were his exact words. He said, not for at least 2 years of seeing me every day, 5 days a week. I waited until my 50 minutes were up, and then I walked out of his office and into the nearest phone booth, and I called my father. I said, I need to talk to you. He said, come on over. I said, no, at home, the home in which I had grown up. I drove as quickly as I could to make sure that the doors and the screens were unlocked and opened of all the feelings I had about my father. Terror was 1 through 10. He came in and sat down on the far side of the breakfast room table, which had always been his seat, and after he was seated, I said, this is the most difficult thing I have ever done. He said, I'll be back in a minute. And he went up the long, winding staircase 2 by 2, or waited for a toilet to be flushed or a phone call to be made, but he came back immediately, and I knew he had a gun. I knew he could kill himself or me, or most probably both of us without ever batting an eye. If that sounds incomprehensible to you, you have never lived in an incest family. Terror reigns, not fear. Terror. I will repeat only 2 sentences from our conversation. He said, "If I had known what it would do to you, I never would have done it." From age 40 to age 56, I clung to a thin shred of hope that maybe, if he had known what it would do to me, he wouldn't have done it. But when I was 56, I received a letter from a woman in Denver who told me that my father had sexually violated her about 20 times in 1983. My father was 74. He died a year later at age 75 of a heart attack. My father knew exactly what he was doing. And he continued to do it until he died. From age 40 to age 45, I managed to continue my career, although paralysis spells, acute anxiety, and panic attacks would challenge even the most simple tasks. But at age 45, as my daughter was beginning puberty, my life shut down completely. All I was able to do for 6 years was to try to get to therapy, to cope with the memories and the feelings that were beginning to come up and overwhelm my life. I would spend days feeling consumed by grief, rage, terror. I would go to therapy and have to relive the experiences I lived as a child and a teenager, and I would hear myself say, "I just can't do that, I just can't do that," or "I don't have any place to put that in my head, I don't have any place to put that in my head." And one day I realized as a child I really didn't have any place to put that in my head. And so, as a child, I needed to literally split my mind in order to accommodate. Locking Jennifer out of my struggle was also agonizing. One summer night when I was about 46, I hung up from a phone call with a family member, sobbing. Jennifer said, "What's wrong, Mommy?" She had asked that question so many times. Later that day, I said to Larry, "I cannot lock her out anymore. Jennifer has to know the truth." This was Larry's precious little girl, his only child. He had slept on the floor near her crib when she was sick, driven her 2 blocks to a friend's house to keep her safe. How difficult it must have been for him to allow perversion and a father's violation of a sacred trust into the world he had so carefully protected from his most special daughter. He had, as always, thought about this long before I had. His response was immediate, but deeply sad. He said, "It's the right thing to do now." The next morning, I sat on steps outside with Jennifer. I couldn't look at her. The sobbing began. Jennifer was only 13. She hadn't even had her first kiss yet. How could she possibly understand? She did understand. And she began to cry. She was the only person who had ever cried for me. It was one of the most profoundly moving moments of my life. I reached out my arms to comfort her, but found that she was gently rocking me instead. It was Jennifer who finally broke the silence. She said, "You know, Mom, you've changed so many people's lives with your speeches. Think how many more lives you could change if people knew this about you." I was stunned. I looked right at her and I said, "Well, what if your friends knew, Jennifer?" And she said, "They would respect you more." My worst fear was over. My daughter was not ashamed of me. I had seen the child in me as forever damned. Jennifer looked at the same child and saw only someone to be proud of. So many people have asked me why I didn't tell my mother. Oh, I did. When I was 48 years old, a year after my father had died, in the same breakfast room where I had spoken with my father only once 8 years earlier, my mother was seated at the other end of the breakfast room table, which had always been her seat, and I was doubled over in gut-wrenching sobs trying to find the words, and when I finally knew she was going to understand, I looked up and my mother was sitting there and she said, "I don't believe you. It's in your fantasy." If my mother would not believe me, a 48-year-old successful adult with my father dead, what chance would I have had as a child with my father alive, powerful, intimidating, and in charge? My mother was forced to believe me only when my eldest sister Gwen came forward to say that she was an incest survivor from age 8 to age 18. Over my lifetime, my mother hurt me far more than my father ever did, and she never laid a hand on me. I had much more anger that I had to work through at my mother than I had for my father. I know that seems incomprehensible to many of you. I think I make sense of it in the book. My relationship with my mother and other survivors' relationships with their mothers is a major theme of the book. My recovery was complicated because my mother could not or would not hear my despair. The good news is it's never too late to be a mother or a father. What I wanted so desperately for my mother to say is, "I am so desperately sorry I did not protect you." But to my mother's death at age 88, she was never able to say the words that I needed to hear. And like the women of old who put out their carpets and beat the dirt out with a stick, my mother beat out every ounce of love I had for her, one beat at a time. If I had told, as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, I guarantee you I would have run back and I would have said, "I lied, I made it up so terrorized would I have been by my father, and so unprotected would I have been by my mother. My healing took giant leaps forward when I began to make the connection between dysfunctional behavior and the cause. Unresolved trauma runs our lives. One very simple example: I was always obsessed with my hair. When I won Miss America, it was in a long, blonde page boy, and it was perfectly combed. It didn't make any difference if I had on Levi's and a torn shirt. My hair had to be perfect. Any boy that I went out with knew, don't touch my hair, don't touch my hair. No boy ever touched my hair. And in my late 40s, I had this incredible insight as to what was causing my obsession with my hair. Even as a young child, I have pictures in the book that show, even as a young child, I had very curly hair. My hair was set. And always, as a teenager, I set my hair in very tight bobby pins. My hair was the only part of my body my father did not invade and touch. It was the only part of me that was good and pure, and no one could touch it. But when I was 39, inexplicably, one day, I walked into a beauty salon and I said, cut off my hair. Cut it off, all of it, just cut it off, short. And then I had the insight. I was 39 as the memories and the feelings were beginning to start coming up. It was when I started to go into paralysis. And so, for reasons that I didn't understand, I was cutting off the only part of me that was good and pure. Now I was all bad, ugly, dirty, unlovable, and guilty. A far more obsessive need was to win everything, everything possible, to compensate for my badness. But every time I tried to win, it would put me in a position of having to perform. If I went to Girls Nation, then I had to come home and address the DAR. I was the only person to play at my 9th grade graduation. I played Finlandia. It's a very difficult piece to play by memory. I was afraid I would forget the notes. I did it anyway. I was the commencement speaker, 3,000 in our school at our graduation. I skied on downhill races for the University of Colorado, going like a madwoman, just skiing so fast. I wasn't a skilled enough skier to go as fast as I did, but I had to win. And I would be terrified every single time I raced. I chose motivational speaking as my full-time career, and every time I stood to speak, I had a panic attack. Every day as Miss America, and I would speak 4 and 5 times a day, I would have a panic attack. I was terrified of speaking, and yet I chose motivational speaking as my full-time career. The insight came in my late 40s. When I attended a therapy session, it's too difficult to explain the setup. I do it in the book, but let me just say that there were 10 convicted rapists who were there. They had all served their time in prison, most of them in solitary confinement, and now they were out and they were mandated to attend these therapy sessions with incest survivors so that they could understand the damage that they had done. We all know what rapists look like. I mean, they're mean and gruff and burly. Well, of course, they don't look like that at all. And one man was very short and lean and timid, and he had little wire glasses. And he said, now that I'm out of prison, I have a job at Kmart or Walmart, and every time I have a break, I have to find a phone booth or a closet to stand in because it's the only place I feel safe because I was in solitary confinement for such a long time. I had an insight that was so powerful, it literally moved me back in my chair. Of course, that's why I raced as a skier and broke and trained wild horses and chose motivational speaking. I was choosing terror because terror felt normal for me. I had grown up in terror, and so it was a choice I was making. And once I had that insight, I could begin to change the behavior. If I were going to speak in front of 15,000 people, which was not unusual, my fear was that I would forget what I was going to say. I'd lose my place. I wouldn't know where to go. All I had to do was take notes, but I never would because I was choosing terror. I take notes now if I'm going to talk for 20 seconds because I'm never going to choose terror again because I was able to make the connection. Body pain tormented me. Body pain. I would lock my body up into a tight fetal position, and then I would tighten it more, and then I would tighten it more, and then I would tighten it more. The problem is that when my father stopped at age 18, I couldn't let the body pain go. And it was the intense feeling of tightness in my body. I looked like this to you, but I felt like this, that I finally checked myself into a psychiatric hospital when I was 49. I couldn't take the body pain one more day. They were not able to help me with the body pain. They did put me on a medication that stopped night terrors, so it was a valuable experience. But when you can't find any help, you'll just go to anybody that you hear about. And somebody said, I know of a new age therapist that can help you with this. And I thought, okay, I'll go anywhere. So I don't remember the man's name. I don't remember what the therapy was. All I remember is that he was tall. And for some reason, we were standing, facing each other. And I remember the question. He said to me, are you sure you want to let your body pain go? And my insides were just screaming out, of course I want to let the body pain go. I need to let it go, but that isn't what I said. I felt my head drop down, and then my body dropped down until I was slumped over completely in a complete victim position, and I heard myself whisper, it's all I have. There's the connection. Tightening up my body was all I had to try to keep myself safe. It never worked, but it was all I had. Now that the memories and the feelings were coming up, I was choosing the body pain. And once I made the connection, I could begin to let the body pain go. One more example of a choice I made. Again, in my late 40s, almost all of us are between the ages of 35 and 50 when we begin to come to terms with our childhood. Whether you came from an alcoholic family or an abusive family, most of us are 35 to 50 before we have to deal with it. Dee Dee said to me, you have to stop locking your door. You just have to stop locking your bedroom door. Just do it. So I said, okay, I will. So I was in my late 40s, and I left the door open and unlocked and got into bed for about 15 seconds, and then I jumped up and closed it and locked it. The next night, I did the same thing. The next night, I said, I'm going to do this. So I turned towards the door, left it open, and this is absolutely true. About every 15 seconds all night, I would open my eyes to watch the door. I believed if I didn't watch the door, I would die. I don't expect you to understand that. I only ask you to honor the fact that those were my feelings. If I don't watch the door, I'm going to die. I did that for a couple of nights. I was completely exhausted. Finally, one night, I turned away from the door, and I said to myself, if I die, I die. But I'm not going to live this way anymore. It was as powerful a statement as I have ever made to myself. And it took me a while, but I now sleep with my door unlocked and opened. Once we make the connection. I had a man say who read the book, he said, I realized I never did it well enough for my father. No matter how good a job I did, it was never quite good enough. I could always have done it a little bit better. And my daughter came home from school one day in 4th grade, and she ran in the back door and she said, I got 4 A's and a B. And I said, what was the B in? And he said, I realized I was doing exactly the same thing to my daughter as my father did to me. Once he had made the connection, he could begin to stop doing that. I believe it's the only way we go from powerless to powerful. We were powerless as children and adults. We must take our power back. One simple example changed the direction of my life forever. When a newspaper reporter learned I was an incest survivor, it was on the front page of the Denver Post the following morning. I knew it was the end of my life. I believed people wouldn't talk to me at the supermarket. I believed I wouldn't have any more friends. It's just this crazy belief system that we are saddled with when we are sexually violated. And the first day, I got a phone call, and this person said, "You have to have a press conference." I said, "Never." She said, "They will call your mother and your 3 sisters." I said, "What time is the press conference?" I learned that they had my eldest sister Gwen's story. I called her in San Francisco and I said, "Please, please don't talk about this in Denver. We are never going to get off the front pages." It was on the front page the first day, the second day, the third day. My sister's story was on the front page of the paper with my picture. My daughter had just come home from her sophomore year in college. And when she got up, I said to Larry and Jennifer, "I've got to get out of here. I've just got to go." So we went to the high school track, which we've done hundreds of times. We were jogging around the track, and the woman with her 2 dogs came, and we usually said hello, but this time she stopped me. She said, "We're so proud of what you're doing, Marilyn. And I'm so grateful your sister Gwen came forward this morning." I said, "Really, why?" She said, "Because yesterday, on our most popular radio talk show, people were calling in and saying, 'Why should we believe her? Now that your sisters come forward, they will have to believe you.'" I was stunned. I looked at her and I said, if people are not going to believe 53-year-old me, then who, dear God, is going to believe a child? Oh, I felt galvanized. I felt like a 747 with all jets burning. I went home, I called both newspapers, 4 television stations, and I said, "Here is my home unlisted number. Today is the first day of the rest of my life." If I were asked to name only one reason why I wrote Miss America by Day, it would be because of the hundreds of times I have heard this sentence. I think I would be more accurate to say thousands of times. I've spoken in over 225 cities. I never leave the room until everyone tells me their story that wants to tell me their story. And I have heard this sentence. When I was 7 and my brother was 13, when I was 8 and my brother was 15, only the ages changed. When I went to group support therapy, there were 6 women. 3 had been violated by their older brothers. The other 3 of us had been violated by different perpetrators, one by her mother. Most of us are afraid of the stranger in the park, but I think this is the most shocking sentence in the book. 14-year-olds comprise the largest number of sex offenders of any age group. 14-year-olds comprise the largest number of sex offenders of any age group. And the most frequently reported age when the abuse begins is age 5. No one knows how to stop a man like my father. But we do know how to stem the tide of older teenagers inappropriately touching or sexually violating younger sisters or brothers or less powerful children, and we do it by talking to them. Most 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old boys and girls have a natural sexual curiosity, and there is nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is if they are sexually inappropriate with a younger or less powerful child. You would never give your 16-year-old son the keys to your car without talking about DUIs, drinking and driving. You would never give your 16-year-old son the keys to your car without driving with him, talking to him about it over and over, stressing the importance and the responsibilities of driving a car. And yet, what is the only urge that is stronger than driving for our teenagers? It's a sexual urge, and we are not talking to them about it. They don't know that they can harm a child literally forever if they are sexually inappropriate. They don't know that because we haven't told them. A woman told me that she couldn't talk with her children because her daughter was only 7. I said the average age when the abuse begins is 5. We don't need to give a 5-year-old any more information than she needs. All she needs is enough information to be able to say, no, Mom and Dad talked to us about this. It is important to talk to your children together so that each child knows that the other child hears what you are saying. If you don't know how to start a conversation, I have a word-for-word conversation that you can use with your children or your grandchildren in the book. What was mind-numbing to me when I was doing the research for Miss America by Day was to learn that over 70% of girls between the ages of 8 and 18 who molest do so while babysitting. I'm sure in their natural curiosity, they believe exploring a baby sexually will do no harm. But an infant who is sexually stimulated will be aroused far beyond what is normal for a child, and this can cause long-term trauma. Trauma that happens before we're verbal comes up in our adult lives as body memories. Babies and toddlers remember. Their bodies remember. As adults, we have body pain and the feelings of fear and anger and anxiety that we can't attach to any experience because the experiences happened when we were pre-verbal. It never occurred to us 20 years ago that we need to be concerned about babysitters, watching our children. But now that we know, we have a responsibility to talk to babysitters. As Maya Angelou said, we did what we knew. When we knew better, we did better. Coming up with a conversation that I could have with a precious 17-year-old daughter of my best friend was not easy. Welcome, please don't molest my child. It had to be something that I could say easily, that I would have not a problem with expressing. It was really the most difficult paragraph that I wrote. But it is an easy conversation, I promise you, to have. It is very doable. And we must protect our children by talking to babysitters. I am not suggesting that we be paranoid. I am suggesting that we are educated. Most children don't tell. Most adults don't tell. I spoke at a large banquet to raise funds for an advocacy center in a Midwestern city. I'd spoken in this city about a year before to what we call a community meeting. It was really a survivor meeting. So I knew that my host, Rosemarie, was a survivor. And as we were walking down the corridor of the hotel room into the ballroom, it was a black tie dinner, 600 people, I said to Rosemarie, I may ask survivors to stand. I said, I know it's a corporate dinner, but I may ask survivors to stand. And she said, I can't stand. I could never stand tonight. She said, I'm in a new position, and my boss is a 65-year-old ex-sheriff. I could never stand in front of him. And I said, that's why I mentioned it. I would never be looking to you to stand. And so I came to that part of my talk when I have to make a decision whether I'm going to ask survivors to stand or not, and I decided to do it. And I said, would you stand now? The first woman to stand sat at my VIP table. She was the wife of the medical director of the hospital. And then 2 women and 3 women and 4 women and 3 women and 2 women. I looked over at Rosemarie's table. Her boss was standing. And she was starting to stand next to him with tears just pouring down her face. After the banquet was over, I went over to him and I said, I'm so sorry. "Who was your violator?" And he said, "My Boy Scout leader." I said, "I'm so sorry. Have you had support?" And he said, "Oh, I've never told anyone." I said, "And you chose to stand at a black tie dinner?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, and how do you feel?" And he said, "Free. I feel free." You have to ask your children if anyone has ever touched them in an uncomfortable way, because children don't tell. Most children don't tell. Most adults don't tell. My last point, this is something that I didn't know about 14 years ago. I did not know that fondling could cause as much long-term trauma as penetration. That was new information for me. I'll give you two hypothetical situations. A 15-year-old girl is coming home from school. She walks down an alley. A stranger rapes her. She goes home immediately. Her parents tells her parents. The police are called. They find the rapist. They go to court. He is sent away for a very long time. The judge turns to the 15-year-old girl and says, "You are one of the bravest young women I have ever known." She is put into therapy and nurtured and loved and believed by her family. Another 15-year-old girl, I can't tell you how many times I have heard this. Another 15-year-old is fondled by her older brother, and she tells her mother, and her mother says, "It didn't happen," or "This is what kids do," or "Don't ever talk about that again." This 15-year-old will almost always have more long-term trauma than the 15-year-old who was raped. We have survivors in the room today. There are survivors in every room. And in a minute, I'm going to ask those of you who would feel safe and comfortable if you would stand. I ask survivors to stand for several reasons. One is because I'm always hoping there are some of you here today who are as empowered as I finally am. It took me 53 years to get rid of shame, but I don't have an ounce of shame today. I'm so very proud of who I am. And I hope that there are others of you here today who have also worked through the shame. I asked survivors to stand because it was standing in the light that finally released me from shame. When my picture was on the front page of the paper for 6 consecutive days in Denver, everyone knew, and people still did speak to me, and people did come and bring me flowers and send me wonderful letters, and all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, I realized I was no longer shamed. And so I like to give survivors an opportunity to take another step in their recovery process by standing in the light and saying, "Yes, this is who I am." And I like to give survivors an opportunity to stand for children who have no voices. How can we turn to children and ask them to speak of it if we have not role modeled for them over and over and over again? I understand what an intimidating room this is, and I know how much courage it will take. But for those of you, if you were fondled once, if you were raped, date raped as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, by a stranger, a relative, a religious leader, a coach, a teacher, whatever the situation was, however old you were, if you would feel safe and comfortable in standing, would you stand now, please? Feel guilty because you did not stand. It was the right decision. For some who did stand, I can promise you it was one of the most difficult things some have ever done. Please, if someone stood at your table or at the next table, please just don't leave the room today without saying something. Don't pretend as if nothing has happened. If you don't know what to say, I was flying home from Atlanta, and I don't even know when we take off. I just open my computer because I answer all my emails and all my letters. I get on the plane, I'm typing. We were in the air for at least an hour before I even looked up. And I looked up and I saw that the seat next to me was empty. And there was a man about 35 sitting next to the window, and he was just staring at me. And I said, well, hello. And he said, I don't mean to stare, but I'm just fascinated. What do you do? And I said, well, I'm a speaker. He said, really? What do you speak about? I said, you don't want to know. He said, I do. I said, trust me on this one. He said, I do. So I faced him square, and I said, I'm an incest survivor. And he went. I said, now I'm going to tell you what to say to me. I'm so very, very sorry you had to endure this as a child. And he said, I'm so very, very sorry you had to endure this as a child. And I said, thank you for saying that. And I went back to my computer. If you don't know what to say to someone who stood today, please, before leaving the room, just say, I'm so sorry. Who is going to change the rampant number of children who are being sexually violated in this community? I close with my favorite example. At the end of World War II, in a tiny village in southern France, the peasants worked long and hard and reconstructed their village, which had been battered by shell fire. American soldiers helped them, and as they completed the last reconstruction, the small church in the town square, the final touch was the reassembling of the statue of their beloved Jesus Christ, which stood at the entrance. Stone by stone, they found all of the pieces except the hands. They held a meeting and considered making new hands and attaching them, but decided instead upon an inscription at the base of the statue. If you went to this village today, you would probably see the small church. The statue of their beloved, handless Jesus Christ, with the inscription below, I have no hands but yours. There are no hands but yours. Thank you.